I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Good evening, I'm Mark Steyn on a Friday Farage this Guy Fawkes night. Let's set it all alight. Is it too much to expect politicians to take a little time off from saving the planet to saving the more modest jurisdictions they're actually responsible for? There are record numbers of strapping young fellows arriving on the shores of England. There are record numbers of rapes in England and Wales. Meanwhile, Boris is bulking up his carbon footprint, flying private planes to dinner engagements. All that, plus I'll be talking to Douglas Murray, best-selling author of The Strange Death of Europe and the Madness of Crowds, and all your comments and questions, shoot me at gbviews@gbnews.uk. All coming up on a Friday Farage, right after the news with Karen.
Thank you, Mark. These are your latest headlines. Greta Thunberg says COP26 has failed and that the summit is turning into a PR event. She was speaking to thousands of young activists as they marched through the centre of Glasgow, demanding action on climate change. The protest was organised by the school strike movement, Fridays for Future.
The COP has turned into a PR event, where leaders are giving beautiful speeches and announcing fancy commitments and targets, while behind the curtains, the governments of the global north countries are still refusing to take any drastic climate action.
Lord Patel has been appointed the new chair of Yorkshire County Cricket Club following Roger Hutton's resignation. It's after former player Azim Rafiq accused the club of institutional racism. The club has been banned from hosting international and major matches for its handling of the claims. 2 other board members have also resigned. Labour and the Lib Dems will fight the upcoming North Shropshire by-election after Tory MP Owen Paterson resigned. Mr Paterson faced a 30-day Commons ban for breaching lobbying rules, but the government voted to block it before a U-turn was made. Education Secretary Nadim Zahawi says it was a mistake for the government to combine a vote on disciplinary procedures with an MP's suspension. The European Commission Vice President says he's disappointed by the UK's efforts to reach an agreement on the Northern Ireland Protocol. Maros Sefcovic announced EU proposals to cut customs-related red tape by half. But he claims after a third round of talks with Britain's Brexit Minister, Lord Frost, they are no closer to an agreement. Talks will continue in London next week. Richard Ratcliffe has told GB News it's unacceptable for Iran to take British citizens hostage on his 13th day of hunger strike outside the Foreign Office. His wife, Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe, was jailed in Iran in 2016 after being accused of plotting to overthrow the government. Mr Ratcliffe started the strike after his wife lost an appeal for freedom.
Hunger strike is a short-term tactic. British government, other governments tend to not respond to hunger strikes during them. So we will see what happens. We will see if we get another meeting with Liz Truss and so on. And maybe we don't. I'm not planning on continuing this to the point where I end up in hospital and in a coma.
Well, that's your news update. Let's now get back to Mark Steyn.
What a week, what a week. If you believe the drivel coming out of COP26, or the G26 as Joe Biden calls it, Boris Johnson is very concerned about rising sea levels washing away the Maldives in the year 2200. He's not, last time I checked, the Prime Minister of the Maldives. He's purportedly the Prime Minister of an entirely different island nation, and he has not the slightst interest in the tide washing up on English shores right now. So far this year, almost 3 times as many quote-unquote migrants have landed in England as did in the whole of 2020. This week, a record number crossed the Channel in a single day, 853. If that were to become the norm, that would be 1/3 a year, or about the population of Belfast. I'm not suggesting they should all be resettled there. I have no idea whether they incline towards Sinn Féin or the DUP, but simply in demographic terms, the answer to the Irish question may well be Somalia. I'll bet Gladstone never saw that coming. The mayor of Calais presides over a town ruined by this human tide. She has men dead of hypothermia on her beaches and drowned in overloaded boats. Last night, 50 Eritreans bound for the United Kingdom via the SNCF railway track were hit by the Calais-Dunkirk train. At least one is dead. England is a convenient 15-nation stroll from Eritrea, and that Calais mayor, Madame Natasha Bouchard, has no doubt who's to blame for the traffic. She says Britain's, quote, soft touch on migrants has inflicted trauma on Calais residents for over 20 years by luring an unending torrent of human misery to one French port town that is the gateway to free housing and free money in what she calls the El Dorado of England. El Dorado is the mythical city of gold. We're not quite there yet, but as Priti Patel has said, these so-called asylum seekers just want to live in British hotels, which are a bit hit and miss in my experience, but probably compare reasonably favourably with the Eritrea Holiday Inn. The point is, we're going to need a lot more hotels. At COP26, Boris is going to have to kick some of those African dictators out of their presidential suites to make room for all these guys from back home fleeing their beneficent rule. 853 quote-unquote refugees per day is about half the number of all babies born in England and Wales that day, which averages currently at about 1,682. So you might think that's great news given the collapsed Anglo-Celtic fertility rate. Evidently a lot of young women and young men too, I don't want to be transphobic, are reluctant to give the old birth canal a workout and might find it more appealing simply to adopt a strapping young lad or fetching lassie wading ashore at Folkestone. Except that 87% of all the quote-unquote refugees are male. Under the Geneva Convention on Refugees, all of these young men have to have a reasonable fear of persecution if they were to be returned to their homeland, or indeed to any of the 27 countries they pass through between here and their homeland. Their homeland is apparently no place for young men, but everything's hunky-dory for their sisters, girlfriends, wives, mothers, grandmas, and baby daughters they left behind. When civil war breaks out, toss your machete to auntie as you head for the door and leave the fight back to her. So on this week's numbers, Britain is going to wind up with a greater male-female demographic imbalance than China after 40 years of its one-child policy. Guys who can't get any action is not a recipe for social tranquility. If you're a young lady in, say, Rotherham, you might want to buy a new pair of running shoes. Let me go back to the mayor of Calais. Madame Bouchard thinks UK law is nuts and is what incentivizes this great tide of humanity. She says, quote, "The British government does not have the courage to review its legislation." She's right, it is a question of courage. All these chaps are going to be staying permanently and running up the room service tab because, as in Rotherham, no one wants to take the heat of being called racist by drawing attention to it. That's why Boris is off in Glasgow saving the planet, because saving the planet is easier. It's the soft option. Why you would want lessons in saving the planet from a guy who lives on an island and can't control his borders at a time of global pandemic is beyond me. But if you ask the political class about enforcing the national frontier, they'll say, oh, it's all very difficult, old boy. Lots of complicating factors, entirely unreasonable to expect us to do anything about it. But recalibrating the global climate, changing the very heavens, that we can do. Saving the planet is where politicians go to preen and posture because they're useless about the things that are their actual responsibility, like saving your country, saving your county, saving your town. COP26 is being held in Glasgow, which has the lowest male life expectancy in Western Europe. All these prime ministers and celebrities yakking it up at just 2 miles from Calton, whereas the WHO pointed out a few years back, male life expectancy was 53.9 years, which is a smidgenet higher than the Central African Republic. And in fairness to the Central African Republic, their numbers were depressed for many years by the cannibal Emperor Bokassa having quite an appetite and keeping a well-stocked freezer. But saving Calton lacks the glamour of saving the planet, doesn't it? What's the best way to save the planet? Well, why not get a sitcom actor from the American adaptation of The Office to fly in an iceberg, to melt all over the floor of the COP26 conference? That's how they ended this first week of it. And that's how bad global warming is, folks. You can have your interior decorator install an iceberg in the living room of your Tuscany holiday home, and next thing you know, it's dripping all over the parquet. Speaking of large inert lumps dripping all over the floor, Boris Johnson is being berated for taking a private plane to have dinner at the Garrick Club with Charles Moore. Charles was my editor at The Telegraph and Boris was my editor at The Spectator, and so I'm understandably bitter and resentful that I wasn't invited. But this is the world our leaders are making for you. You'll be on your Boris bike, pedaling through streets of human misery, while he's high above you, cruising at 30,000 feet en route to cocktails with Greta Thunberg. As the mayor of Calais says, what's missing is courage. Let me know your thoughts. What's the solution to this crisis and who is to blame? The French, or as the French say, the British. GB Views at gbnews.uk. Looking forward to what you have to say. Kevin Saunders joins us. He knows Calais very well because he was Her Majesty's Chief Immigration Officer there. Kevin, how many of these 854 people who landed in one day, how many of them are ever going to be leaving the United Kingdom?
None. Not one single one on the current legislation we have at the moment.
So all these people are basically here to stay. Now, tell me your view. As we said, you were the head of British immigration in Calais. What is the actual reality there? Is the mayor of Calais right, and this is just the United Kingdom's fault for incentivising this traffic?
No, the mayor of Calais is completely right. She is 100% right. We make the UK too attractive to asylum seekers, illegal migrants, and basically everybody wants to come. So she's dead right. I've got a lot of sympathy for her. I lived near Calais for 5 years. I've seen what it's like. It's awful. It is absolutely awful. I wouldn't allow my wife to walk out in Calais at night time. It's just too dangerous.
Well, the government says that it does deport people, Kevin, and so they evidently feel, I take it, relatively relaxed because however long the process takes, they intend to send these undeserving people back.
Right. To send somebody back to the country that they came from, you need a document. You need to be able to prove to the country that you're sending the people back to that they are a resident of that country. What these people do is they destroy all documentation before they jump on the boat to come across the channel. So they arrive in the UK undocumented. That's the way they do it. So we then have to go to countries like the Sudan or whatever to try and get a travel document out of them for that person. who may not have given us his right name, who may not have given us his right date of birth, who may not have told us anything that's true. So, no, we can't send them back.
There are those who do have documentation, Kevin. I mean, the problem seems to be very basic, doesn't it? At a time when there are huge restrictions on landing at Heathrow for the last year and a half for people who have all the paperwork. At the same time, whether you have paperwork or not, if you land on the shores of England, it's a completely different system than if you're a businessman from New York flying into Heathrow. Why is it? We're told when we ask why it is that more of them can't be sent back, that it's because of the Geneva Convention on Refugees, and yet they have passed through maybe 6, 7, 8, 9 countries that all also subscribe to that convention and are perfectly safe. They're coming here from France, which is a first world nation, even though many in the United Kingdom might dispute that. It is a first world nation. It's a member of the G7. It's on the Big Five of the Security Council. Why is it that France doesn't seem obligated to keep them and the United Kingdom does?
Because under the European conventions that we've had, the only 2 countries that ever played by the rules were the United Kingdom and Ireland. None of the others would play the game. They just said no. And in fact, the French would say to us, well, if you don't like what we're doing, take us to the European Court. We'll see you there in 5 or 6 years, because that's how long it was taking to bring a case against them. So forget the Geneva Convention, because the Europeans will not play that game with us. They are quite happy, the Europeans are quite happy to say the United Kingdom is that way, off you go.
Why is it, though, that the United Kingdom is a more desirable resting place? Is it the UK has traditionally had a broader sense of British national identity and has operated on the principle that anyone can become British, more or less? Is that simply more appealing than rather narrower definitions of nationality on the continent?
No. What the people want, and I work there, I've spoken to these people, they want to come to the UK because everything is free and they're going to get housing, they're going to get education, they're going to get health care, and we're going to give them money as well. Now, for you and me, the amount of money that we're actually giving them a week probably doesn't sound a vast amount, but it's an awful lot more than they're getting anywhere else. So that's why they're coming. And I mean, what really annoys me is these people are sleeping in the jungle, or what's left of the jungle, in northern France. They're then coming to the UK. They're complaining about Napier barracks. They're complaining about being in hotels. They're even complaining because we're dispersing them to other parts of the UK, and they want to live in London.
They're not the only people who've complained about Napier barracks. It has been broadly condemned, Kevin. But you have seen this situation. You were a quarter century, basically, with UK immigration. Is it just getting irredeemably worse? And is there no political will to solve this situation?
It's certainly getting worse. Whether there's a political will or not, I don't know. I like some of the things that the Home Secretary is saying in the Immigration and Nationality Bill. Basically, if it was me, if I was the Home Secretary, I would be setting up reception centres offshore to deal with these asylum claims, because that, in my opinion, is the way to do it.
That's something closer to the Australian model. But the Australian model has not been taken up by many people in the Northern Hemisphere. Thank you for that, Kevin. Your reactions to migration and more, plus The latest on the disgraced ex-MP Owen Paterson, all that straight ahead on Farage.
On Brazier at 8 last night, the French government opened a new migrant centre in Calais that critics say will act as a magnet for asylum seekers, will it? Also, China's massively beefing up its stockpile of nuclear weapons. We ask an expert if this really is a new Cold War. And a survey suggests 4 out of 10 young people have no idea what bonfire night means. That's Brazier from 8.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back to your Friday Farage. As you surely know, the former Cabinet Minister Owen Paterson is out of Parliament. He was Secretary of State for Northern Ireland a decade ago, and subsequently a Northern Irish company decided to put him on the payroll for a little light consulting work. That proved a very lucrative signing for the company in question, Randox, because it wound up getting various government contracts without any competing bids, culminating in £500 million for coronavirus tests from HMG, thanks to Mr. Paterson pitching it to the relevant minister, Lord Bethell. Paterson's toast, his history, he's gone after a rough couple of years. Last year, his wife hanged herself on his birthday, and he has accused MPs of mocking his late wife and her death, and essentially has given that as the reason for his departure. The father of the House of Commons, Sir Peter Bottomley, says the only way we're going to stop MPs bulking up their salaries with all this lobbying work is to pay them more, so they can make just as much money but without the tedious chore of having to call ministers of the Crown and shake them down for £500 million's worth of county Antrim COVID kits. Well, we have with us Andre Walker. Great to have you with us, Andre. And what do you make of this?
Look, the first and most important thing is I think that the behaviour of the Standards Committee and the Labour Party has been absolutely appalling in this case. Let's just make something really, really clear to start with. Every single Brexiteer that I know has been investigated by one or other organisation, whether that be the National Crime Agency in the case of Aaron Banks, whether that be the Electoral Commission in the case of Darren Grimes, or whether that be the Standards Committee in the case of Owen Paterson. Time and time again, we see people on the political right being attacked. Now, I don't know whether it was right that Owen Paterson should have been personally paid by Randox and then also allowed a think tank that he run to also be funded by Randox. But the fundamental point is this. Why is it that this so-called independent committee at the House of Commons is run by Chris Bryant? Remember him of Underpants fame? Well, actually, most people remember him because of that. But actually, the reason that you should remember him is because he is a factional Remainer, in the same way that people on the Electoral Commission are factional Remainers. I think what we have to say here, more importantly than anything else, is what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Now, my question to anybody watching this programme is, how is it that one company, the Cooperative, is able to run and finance its own political party? And that is deemed to be wholly appropriate. And yet a member of staff at Randox, namely Owen Paterson, is not allowed to run a think tank financed by Randox. If you want to abolish it, abolish it. But why is it only our side that ever comes under attack, ever comes under scrutiny, is ever criminally prosecuted or attacked by the Electoral Commission? That is the fundamental question here. And I think the cowardice of Conservative MPs to back down on this is simply staggering.
Well, since you brought up this idea that only one type of Member of Parliament is prosecuted, we should mention that a Labour MP has in fact been convicted for threatening to throw acid at her love rival. She's still sitting in Parliament. She doesn't seem to be. She's got a criminal conviction for serious violent threatening, and yet apparently she's still sitting in Parliament surrounded by MPs she could be throwing acid over if she wanted to. Is there a double standard with her too?
Yeah, and I just want to be clear, the reason that I laughed there was not because of the incident, which actually is incredibly serious. The level of harassment that she meted out that she's been convicted for is a bad thing. I'm laughing because of the sheer double standards of all of it. We see it all the time. You know, if you look at the case of Aaron Banks versus the Electoral Commission, the Electoral Commission was effectively the National Crime Agency was effectively saying that his company, which had all British customers, was registered in the United Kingdom because it had a parent company that ran companies, that owned companies in multiple jurisdictions based in Jersey or the Channel Islands, wherever it was specifically. That made it a foreign company. That is simply not true in terms of legislation. Similarly, the idea that Darren Grimes is one of the most egregious offenders against the Electoral Commission and against British democracy is similarly for the birds. One thing that Owen Paterson has said, that he was wholly unable to give proper evidence to this committee. We saw Chris Bryant, the arch Remainer, stand up in defence of it, and there is no appeal whatsoever. But the other thing is, it is the perfect right of members of Parliament to overrule the committee. And I just think that there is another problem here. We have so many people within the Conservative Party who are such supine wets on these issues, totally unwilling to stand up for what is right and decent in the face of scrutiny from The Guardian. They basically wet their knickers at every opportunity when a left-wing journalist comes on the phone.
Let me just get a clarification on that, because you're basically saying that, MPs have business interests. I agree with you that if you've got some business interests in Jersey, in the Channel Islands, in a crown dependency, that is some kind of nefarious, murky foreign thing. But we're now saying, okay, we're not just going to crack down on your business interests, legitimate business interests, but if after office, you attempt to leverage the only thing you have. You've been Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. That's a job that, until recently, you could get killed over. People were trying to kill you. By the way, the guys who were trying to kill Owen Paterson, Sinn Féin, are running the biggest criminal operation on the island of Ireland right now, which appears to be no problem for serving in politics, being elected to Parliament, being elected to the Northern Ireland Assembly. So there's a huge double standard here, and you're blaming it essentially on the supine nature of the Conservative Party.
Oh, without a doubt. Now, let me make another point to you about the disconnect between people and politics. Look, members of Parliament traditionally were unpaid. Now, I grudgingly accept that members of Parliament have to be paid, although I have to say what I would pay them is 90% of an average of their past 5 years' salaries, so they didn't benefit financially. But okay, we can agree on this. But time and time again, what happens is it's being turned into a full-time job. Now, If being a member of parliament was a full-time job, how could you be a government minister at the same time? And actually what we're doing, and the reason why Sir Peter Bottomley is so desperate to hike up MPs' salaries is because he wants to create effectively a political class, an elite. You become a House of Commons researcher, then you work at a trade union, then you become a member of parliament on 200 grand a year for life. You have no engagement with the real world, you understand nothing about business, and you don't give a toss.
And you have a political class that's completely disconnected from their constituents.
Absolutely.
But Andre, isn't that simply a function of the way government has changed in the last 150 years? In a big government society, doesn't that mean that you will automatically have a professionalised political class?
Well, I used to work as a House of Commons researcher, and let me tell you the thing that was incredibly frustrating. The number of letters that used to come into us about legislation were absolutely tiny. It was constantly about benefit claims, immigration claims, and all this sort of stuff. Effectively, people right up and down the country in political parties, specifically the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats, indeed the Greens and the SNP, they want a social worker for every constituency. These people don't do legislation. Let me tell you what happens. Your average member of parliament, here's the bell, the phone goes, and it says vote yes by text message or vote no by text message. They're corralled through the voting lobbies not knowing what they're voting for. If actually we had people that were more connected to business and less social workers, I think that we would really improve the legislation being made in this country.
A parliament of social workers, that is the problem as you see it, Andre. Thank you very much for your opinion. And you're right about the bell, the three-line whip that Boris used with Mr. Patterson just a couple of days ago. Last year, almost all crime fell because all the ne'er-do-wells were in lockdown. But one crime soared to record levels: rape. In the 12 months up to June this year, there were 61,158 rapes in England and Wales. That's the highest number ever recorded. And the rate accelerated through the spring. What's going on here? Peter Blexley is a former detective with Scotland Yard, and we're grateful to have him. Peter, what is the reason for this staggering number?
Well, first of all, may I apologise to you and the viewers, because if it sounds like I'm speaking from a war zone, I am in South London. Of course, it's bonfire night. So there's a lot of fireworks going off, but I've closed all the windows, closed all the doors, and I'm doing my best. So forgive me. Back to your question.
You're not in Helmand province, I take it. That's great, Peter. What's going on with these rape statistics?
Well, there are a number of factors at play here, I think. These figures were compiled, generally speaking, before the tragic and awful murder of Sarah Everard and Sabina Nessa. So there is an element of people at that point having greater confidence in coming forward and reporting crimes of a sexual nature. Now, there had been a trend of that, and of course, that is to be welcomed, albeit, of course, on the flip side, there is a woefully low conviction rate in terms of the number of rapes being reported. And that has been recognised by the government as a matter of serious concern, and some steps, I hope, are going to be taken to try and address that. It's a complex matter, how the police investigate it, how the Crown prosecution present the cases, and how, in fact, the court deals with it. There are problems there. Another aspect of crime which soared throughout the lockdown was, of course, fraud. And that is really an epidemic proportions, because so many criminals being confined to their homes actually turn to their laptops to commit crime. And that level of crime is off the Richter scale. So many millions of people are becoming victims of fraud as well.
Yeah, that's becoming an increasingly common problem simply by the nature of the world we live in, where we open up a computer and give it all kinds of information that we wouldn't necessarily give to a human being. But the rape statistics are interesting. You talked about the relatively small number of convictions. And feminists always say, for example, only about an eighth of rapes are ever reported. A couple of years ago, the official statistic for those rapes complaints that were ever criminally prosecuted, it was 1.7%. So isn't it entirely rational, if you're inclined that way, in the modern United Kingdom, to be a rapist? Because if only a sixth get reported, and if only 1.7% of those that are reported get criminally prosecuted, you've literally got a 99.9% chance of getting away with this.
The courts, the prosecution service and the police have struggled on this front, despite police setting up specialist sexual offences units. And that's something that we should welcome. But still, these prosecution and conviction levels are at stubbornly low figures. Something clearly has to be done, but this is across the criminal justice system that this is an issue. Is there an issue about witnesses being believed? I think that is also a factor. But whatever it may be, I would urge anybody who is the victim of any kind of crime whatsoever to please set aside the current trend of a lack of confidence in the police and please step forward and report that crime. It is only by crime being accurately reported that the police can get some kind of picture as to what priorities they should focus on. And of course, policing priorities is a hot potato because the British police in recent times have become a one-stop shop for all of society's ills. And in many regards, some major crime is not getting the focus I believe it should have.
Well, that's a very polite way, Peter, of putting what to many people is a big complaint about the police, that if you make a transphobic tweet, they'll send 3 officers round to your house. But if you're in one of these miserable communities where there are all these euphemistically called grooming gangs, the police won't do anything. I mean, surely at a certain level, you don't need to have more reported crime to figure that a policeman should be taking rape more seriously than an ill-phrased joke about Nelson Mandela's death on Twitter.
Crime is crime, and I understand some crimes will be perceived as being, and indeed are, more serious than others. But hate crime is on the statute book. It's something that needs to be prosecuted, and of course is a policing priority. But our British police are really at a crossroads now, I feel. And we do have, of course, the Casey inquiry into the standards and of the Metropolitan Police. The findings of that will be extremely interesting. But I revert to what I said not so long ago, in so much as that the police are now that one-stop shop for all of society's ills, from people ludicrously dialing 999 to report the fact that they've had the incorrect pizza topping delivered to them. And I'm not being flippant here. Unfortunately, because of a decade of austerity, many other public services were cut back almost as much as the police were. So out of hours, for example, if somebody is in a mental health crisis, it is probably going to fall upon the police to have to deal with that person. And really, the police shouldn't be. So much time is hoovered up with dealing with mental health crises that they really are detracted away from crime.
No, but Peter, with the best will in the world, it's not just the public turning to the police for that. The police have embraced that role. They had all these vans out, I think it was in Merseyside a few months ago, saying that being offensive is an offence, which actually isn't true in English law. I mean, all kinds of people are offensive. I'm offensive routinely. You may have been offensive to people. But they're driving around as if they're trying to drive up traffic about rude Facebook posts with huge vans saying being offensive is an offence. And at the same time, as we've seen in Rotherham and Telford, there are basically the local grooming gangs become institutions that take young English girls as child sex slaves for years on end. The police, obviously, at a certain level, the police seem to find it easier just to go around policing everybody's Facebook posts.
Well, firstly, let's deal with that Merseyside situation. It didn't take that police force very long to realise the folly of their ways, and there was a quick retraction and an apology, and I hope that they focused more on tackling crime than something which, quite frankly, was ludicrous.
But Peter, some idiot chief constable or assistant chief constable signed off on that and paid money to some graphics design company to come up with that idiotic slogan. So there's a problem in some ways right at the top with British policing right now, and meanwhile at the bottom there is this very real situation of rising sexual assaults. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, Peter. I'm very grateful to you. Coming next on tonight's Farage, one of the most incisive analysts of the scene, Douglas Murray. We're going to wind him up and let him go. That's next on GB News.
On Tonight Live with me, Mark Dolan, my big question guest is boxing promoter Kelly Maloney, who transitioned from being Frank. Her story live at 10. In The Clash, should we ban fireworks? And what's the real truth around the COVID figures? I'll speak to top statistician Jamie Jenkins. Will the taxi industry recover from the pandemic? And what's the point of going to university? Plus, in my monologue, it's time to clamp down on the pronoun police. See you at 9.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Happy bonfire night. No Farage to barrage tonight, but you can stump the Steyn. Shoot me a question. gbviews@gbnews.uk. We have had some reactions to our top story about the migrant situation, and in particular about Boris taking a private plane to have dinner with Charles Moore, my old editor Charles Moore, my old editor Boris. Tom King says, the PM and other leading people in the world need to travel at speed because that's their job. You calling them out for doing that while sat on your bottom in the studio is pathetic. You know something, Tom? The reintroduction of serfdom might actually solve some of the problems you're worried about. That would enable Tsar Boris to go travelling around in luxury and at speed, while you just labour below of no consequence. You know something? The former Prime Minister of Australia, Tony Abbott, flew coach from Sydney, economy class, from Sydney on Qantas to his ski vacation a couple of years ago. He was in row 58D, and the guy next to him was taking some cell phone footage and said, I haven't had a moment's... That's a long flight, Sydney to the Swiss Alps. And he was able to travel economy to do that. There is no reason other than your craven posture, Tom King, that Boris Johnson or John Kerry or any of these other people need to go around on private jets. And it just means that Boris is going to become even more disconnected from you, Tom King, than he is at the moment. Tolly Boy says there will be a lot more Rotherhams with all these thousands of young migrant men seeking female company. I'm surprised more women can't see the pending danger to them. That's the sentimentalisation of immigration. We don't look on it as a rational public policy whereby immigration is meant to benefit the people who are already here. We just think, oh, isn't it nice? There's all these nice strapping young men washing up on the shores of Folkestone, and what could possibly go wrong with that? Douglas Murray is the international best-selling author of The Strange Death of Europe and The Madness of Crowds, both of which are cracking reads. It's always great to see you, Douglas. I think just going back to the first time I met you was at a conference not long after 9/11. I think you were just down from Oxford. I think that's how they say it. And at that time, I did my usual, the glass is 15/16 empty routine, and you were the optimist, Douglas. Are you still optimistic, having written The Strange Death of Europe and The Madness of Crowds?
First of all, it's great to be with you, Mark. A huge pleasure and an honour. And by the way, I can top your comment. I just guffawing here in the studio about what you said to your listener, Tom. I can cap that. I've actually flown economy with Tony Abbott. I know he flies economy, so there I can back up your story. You got a source here. I can't think of anything worse than a long-haul flight sitting between you and Tony Abbott, wedged up in an economy class seat. But you're right. That's the way. Yeah, absolutely.
That's the way
certain politicians travel. You know, it's a strange American and now increasingly British thing that we have this sort of presidential style of of travelling around. As for the optimism, pessimism, half glass full thing, it changes, doesn't it? I mean, depending on, first of all, who's in power, who's in charge, and secondly, on private acts of courage. One of the things that stunned me in recent years and was so depressing that led me to write about The Strange Death of Europe was this situation, which nobody knows better about than you, in which everybody could see things happening and nobody was meant to say anything about it, let alone, or certainly not to say anything that was objecting to what was going on. In the 2015 migrant crisis, which we're seeing as a little echo of now still in the south coast of England, in the 2015 crisis, you were only meant to say, hurrah, look at how many people have arrived, and never look at it in the other end of that. And that's the same in question after question in our era. The things you've been talking about on the programme this week, these are all examples of things that we've been told there's only one thing we're meant to think about them, and you've got to just parrot that thing. And people are terrified about objecting. They're terrified of saying, aren't there any downsides to this even? So there's a long answer to your question, but the answer is, I always become optimistic again when I see even one person standing up. And that doesn't have to be a famous person. It doesn't have to be somebody on a private jet jetting off to a COP28, 32 or any other meeting. No. It can just be any individual in society. Recently there was an academic. There's an academic in England who's been very brave. That just gives me hope.
Right. So if you have, well, that's how we used to think about it, that all you need is one man or woman with courage, cis woman with courage, standing up, and then others will follow them, and you will then have a genuine back and forth. I sense that actually something is different is happening, and that on one issue after another, people are just falling silent because to them it's more trouble. Why take the hit to your career for expressing an honest view? We've seen J.K. Rowling in the UK, and we've seen Margaret Atwood in Canada, but they are the two most successful novelists of their respective societies. J.K. Rowling is one of the wealthiest women on the planet. I mean, do you really have to be at that level to withstand the heat now?
It's one way to withstand the heat, is to be mega rich. That's certainly one way through. But I'm not sure that that's necessary these days, because figures like the academic I just mentioned, Kathleen Stock, she's a professor of logic, she has just been sticking to her ground, which is that chromosomes exist and that they matter. And it's true you have to walk through a certain amount of fire sometimes, but I really encourage people to do that, whatever their role. First of all, because it's the right thing to do. Secondly, because quite often it doesn't require as much bravery as is sometimes said. Thirdly, because you'll find much better friends and a much better reception committee on the other side. Who wants, this is a really important point, who wants to be just another person kowtowing to the boring consensus of your time with all of the sort of pathetic, cowardly people who just keep parroting what they're told? Who would want to be in that group? Much, much more fun on the other side of that, when you've walked through that, when you say what you see in the world, when you're honest with yourself and with others, you find a much merrier gang of people. They're all the people you'd want to be with anyway. I mean, I hate to make the comparison, but it's a bit like the old thing when the smoking ban came in. It was more fun on the curbside with the smokers than it was inside,
Well, you say that, Douglas, but isn't it the case? So we've just seen this extraordinary thing: representatives of 180 nations all gathering in Glasgow to say and apparently think exactly the same thing, and they're all and even Her Majesty the Queen, God bless her, whose remarks I thought were a constitutional abomination. And I see have driven prominent Australians and Canadians to announce that they're now Republicans. But even Her Majesty the Queen just says, I just want to think the same thing about the climate as everybody else does, as all these 180 other nations are. We're all going to say the same thing and be thrilled for 2 weeks by all thinking alike.
Yes. Well, I mean, that unbelievably wasteful exercise in Glasgow is just another example of it. I feel sorry for the Queen having to release such a statement. Whether she believes it or not, I don't know. But you're right. I mean, it's terrible that people sort of think there's only one thing they can say about this. If the world leader, I mean, I'm so fed up, as I'm sure most people are, with these ridiculous climate summits. Send for the actors. Great, Leonardo DiCaprio's arrived. Now we can get down to business. Send for the school truant from Scandinavia. Great, now we're going to solve some global problems. And the ridiculous ramping up of the rhetoric ever. This time, I mean, like you, I mean, we've all heard for years being told we've got 10 years left till we all burn to death, or we've got 20 years left till we all drown. And now Boris Johnson this week really upped the ante and gave the British taxpayer our dues by telling us we've got 1 minute left. I'm sorry, at that point I think most people just turn over the channel. If the COP26 the world leaders were serious, they would have got on the stage this week and they'd have talked about things that they're going to do in terms of new technologies which would change this. They didn't focus on that. They did the same thing they always do. They tried to terrify the public some more in a direction which I think the public is rather dubious about, with good reason.
Well, let me, since you brought up this, we've only got 10 years to save the planet. I'm not a big fan of the Prince of Wales, but a few years back, he actually was more specific, and I think he said we have 8 years and 2 months to save the planet. And he also around that time said that the red squirrel was going to be extinct. I think it was due to be extinct in 2016. I saw a red squirrel outside my house this morning. So the Prince of Wales was wrong on that. How do these guys get away with it? How he can't even get the extinction of the red squirrel right. Why should he know the death of the planet?
Yeah, when St. John the Divine was writing the Apocalypse, I bet he never guessed that the grey squirrel would be the sign of Armageddon. He didn't see that one coming. We all shriek in terror every time we see a grey squirrel from now on. It is so ludicrous, isn't it? Because yeah, they've been doing this for years, and as I say, I mean, it's really striking that there's just the gap between the politicians and the public. The rhetoric is unbelievable. Let me give you a very quick example. I'm in the United States at the moment. President Joe Biden has promised that America's going to go basically entirely very nearly carbon neutral by 2050. I mean, no one's going to be around remembering that in 2050 any more than they're going to remember Prime Minister
Joe
Modi in
Biden's
India promising that India's going to be. Well, Prime Minister Modi says India in 2070 will be carbon neutral. I'm sure we'll all be around to hold him to that promise, and I'm sure there's a court we can take him to. But there's a serious point here, which is that Joe Biden says that they're going to go to carbon neutral in America by 2050. That's going to cost every American household something like $11,000 a yeyear. You know how much the American public have said they're willing to pay per year for this? $24. $24, not $11,000. Nobody's volunteering $11,000 per household, but everyone just agrees. Everyone says, yeah, we'll go along with the rhetoric. I don't see why we should.
Yeah, for 3 macchiatos. Thank you. That's about 3 macchiatos with butterscotch topping and whipped cream, $24. Thank you for that, Douglas. It's always great to see you, and that will do it for tonight's show. Nigel, the man himself, is going to be back on Monday, and I will see you next week. Have a spiffy weekend, and stand by for the indispensable man, the one and only Colin Brazier, coming up right after the weather.
Hello. Many areas enjoyed some dry weather on Friday, but changes as we head through this coming weekend. Rain will push its way southwards across the UK. Showers flowing from the north, but it will be the strength of the wind I think we notice most through Saturday. So we look at the pressure pattern, then you can see high pressure towards the southwest. That's what's kept things mainly dry today. But towards the northwest, this area of low pressure, that's going to dominate our weather as we head through this coming weekend, bringing some rain, but also those strengthening winds, like I said. Already through Friday evening and overnight, we're going to see some heavy, more persistent rain spreading in across much of Scotland. But elsewhere, actually, some decent weather for bonfire night. Lots of cloud around, but mainly dry. Just a bit of patchy rain towards the west, and a noticeably mild night to come than recent ones as well. Last night, temperatures dropped close to, if not below, freezing. Tonight, temperatures holding up well above freezing, 5 to 10 degrees. Now, later on the night, we'll see more persistent rain spreading in across Scotland and Northern Ireland. That will continue to push its way southwards through the day. But ahead of that, actually, a lot of dry weather first thing across much of England and Wales. Quite a lot of cloud, some brightness towards the east. But that will change, like I said, as this cloud and rain will sink its way southwards through the day. So quite heavy rain on that, like I said. Still dry towards the southeast, sunshine and showers following from the northwest, but for all areas those winds will strengthen with that rain band. Particularly towards the west, we could see coastal gales. A milder day to come across the board. As we head through the rest of Saturday into the evening and overnight, then that cloud and rain will push its way southwards. The rain turning quite light and patchy. Clearer spells following from the north, but it will be the strength of the wind we continue to notice. Those winds picking up as we head through the night across much of northern Scotland in particular. Here we could see gusts 60, 70, possibly 80 miles an hour in exposure. A wind warning in force for that. Elsewhere, still quite windy, and that will keep the temperatures up, so another mild night to come. So we look ahead to Sunday morning then. You can see here still some showery rain across much of northern and eastern Scotland. That will slowly ease through the day, but we continue with those very strong winds across Scotland through much of the day. Elsewhere, breezy, yes, but it will be mainly dry. Quite a lot of cloud around towards the west, but a lot of dry weather, bright or sunny spells, particularly towards the east. Same changeable into the early part of next week. Some rain, particularly towards the north and west, mainly dry further south and east.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News.